Before your mind reaches for explanations, before memory interferes with instinct, pause for a brief moment and allow yourself to notice what is already happening inside you. This is not a test of intelligence, nor a puzzle to be solved correctly. It is an encounter with the quiet mechanisms you have been carrying for years without naming them. Many people live their entire lives negotiating with invisible barriers, arguing with doors that were never meant to be forced, exhausted not by reality itself, but by the resistance they unknowingly maintain. What follows is not an accusation, but an invitation. There is a way through, and it begins by seeing clearly rather than thinking harder. Now, in front of you, imagine 4 locks. Do not compare them. Do not rank them. Do not search for meaning yet. Simply notice which one draws your attention without effort, the one that pulls you in before logic has time to speak. That attraction is already a form of truth. Lock 1. This lock speaks to the person who has learned to survive by control. Not the obvious kind of control that shouts or dominates, but the subtle, exhausting vigilance that monitors everything internally and externally, always anticipating failure, always preparing for disappointment. This lock is smooth, well-maintained, almost elegant, because you have invested years refining it. You learned early that unpredictability was dangerous, so you built structure, discipline, routines, rules, and expectations. On the surface, it looks like strength. Inside, it feels like constant tension. This lock does not protect treasure. It protects fear. Fear of chaos, fear of vulnerability, fear that if you loosen your grip for even a moment, everything will collapse. You are not afraid of effort. You are afraid of surrender. And so you live as if life were a system that must be optimized rather than a process that unfolds. Every emotion is analyzed, every desire justified, every mistake punished internally long after the world has moved on. Alan Watts often pointed out that the illusion of control is one of the most sophisticated traps of the ego. The more you attempt to dominate the flow of life, the more rigid you become, and rigidity is the first sign of fracture. This lock exists because at some point, control felt like safety, and perhaps it was, once. But what protected you then may be imprisoning you now. The pain beneath this lock is exhaustion, not physical tiredness, but the deep fatigue of never resting mentally, of never allowing uncertainty to exist without resistance. The solution is not to abandon responsibility, but to recognize the difference between participation and domination. Life does not ask you to hold it together. It asks you to dance with it. The moment you stop trying to command the current, you discover it was never trying to drown you. If Lock 1 called to you, pause and reflect, then write in the comments, "I release the need to control what I fear." By putting this into words, you turn awareness into action. And if this resonates with you, consider subscribing, because what comes next will take you even deeper into the unseen structures shaping your inner world. Lock 2. This lock speaks to the person who has learned to endure rather than to live. It belongs to someone who became strong too early, not because they wanted to, but because there was no alternative. You adapted by becoming reliable, composed, emotionally contained, the one who does not fall apart, the one others lean on. Over time, endurance turned into identity. You stopped asking whether something nourished you and began asking only whether you could survive it. This lock feels heavy, not aggressive, not ornate, but dense, like something forged under pressure. You rarely complain, not because you feel no pain, but because you trained yourself to function despite it. Somewhere along the way, you confused resilience with self-erasure. You learned to tolerate situations that slowly drained you, relationships that never truly met you, routines that kept you moving but never fulfilled. You told yourself that this was maturity, that wanting more was childish, that rest would come later. The psychological barrier here is not weakness but numbness. When endurance becomes permanent, sensitivity feels dangerous. You learn to shut certain doors inside because opening them once hurt too much. So you kept going, accumulating silent weight, convincing yourself that meaning would eventually justify the sacrifice. But meaning cannot be postponed indefinitely. Suppressed longing does not disappear. It hardens. Alan Watts spoke often about how suffering intensifies when we resist our own experience. This lock exists because you resisted your own need for aliveness. You did not lack courage, you lacked permission. Permission to want, to choose differently, to admit that survival alone is not the same as living. The pain beneath this lock is emptiness disguised as strength. The solution is not to undo your resilience, but to soften it, to allow yourself to feel again without demanding that every feeling be productive or useful. When you stop measuring your worth by how much you can endure, you create space for joy to return without guilt. If Lock 2 called to you, take a moment and write in the comments, "I'm allowed to want more than survival." Let this sentence break the spell of silent endurance. And if you recognize yourself here, subscribe to this channel, because the next lock reveals a barrier even more subtle, one that hides behind identity itself. Lock 3. This lock speaks to the person who has built an identity so carefully that they no longer know where it ends and where they begin. It belongs to someone who learned to become someone in order to be accepted, understood, admired, or simply left alone. Over time, the role worked. You became recognizable, predictable, reliable in the way others expect you to be. And yet, beneath that polished consistency, there is a quiet tension you rarely name. This lock is intricate. It looks intelligent, complex, meaningful, almost impressive. It suggests depth, philosophy, self-awareness. You have thought deeply about who you are, how you function, why you behave the way you do. You can explain yourself fluently. You can narrate your history with insight. But explanation is not freedom. Understanding the map is not the same as walking the terrain. The barrier here is not ignorance but attachment to a story about yourself that once helped you make sense of pain, confusion, or chaos. That story gave you coherence when things felt scattered. It gave you language when emotions were overwhelming. But now it has become a psychological enclosure. Every experience is filtered through who you believe you are. Every impulse is evaluated against whether it fits the narrative. Alan Watts often warned that the ego loves masks, even spiritual ones. The mind clings to identity because identity feels stable and stability feels safe. But life is not static. When you cling to a fixed self-image, growth begins to feel like betrayal. Change becomes threatening, not because it is harmful, but because it dissolves the familiar outline of who you think you must be. The pain beneath this lock is subtle alienation, not from others, but from immediacy. You are always slightly removed from direct experience, observing yourself living rather than fully inhabiting the moment. The solution is not to destroy your identity, but to loosen it. To recognize that who you are is not a conclusion, but an ongoing movement. When you stop defending an image, you regain access to spontaneity. If Lock 3 resonated with you, pause and write in the comments, "I am more than the story I tell about myself." This sentence is not a rejection of your past, but an opening toward presence. And if this reflection touched something honest in you, subscribe, because the final lock confronts the deepest barrier of all, the one almost everyone carries without noticing. Lock 4. This lock speaks to the person who feels blocked not by fear, pain, or identity, but by an unnameable sense of delay. It belongs to someone who feels as though life is always about to begin, yet never quite does. You prepare, you reflect, you wait for clarity, confidence, healing, certainty, permission. You believe there is one final inner condition that must be met before you can move freely. Until then, you remain paused. This lock is minimal, almost invisible. It does not appear heavy or complex, which is precisely why it is so powerful. You rarely notice it as a barrier. You call it prudence, timing, realism, responsibility. You tell yourself you are being thoughtful, not afraid, and yet something essential remains unopened. You sense it in quiet moments, in the background dissatisfaction that no achievement fully dissolves, in the feeling that you are always slightly late to your own life. The psychological barrier here is postponement disguised as wisdom. You learned, perhaps through disappointment or loss, that acting too soon can hurt, so you internalized delay as protection. But over time, delay became a habit, a reflex. You stopped trusting movement itself. You began to believe that insight must precede action, rather than realizing that action often generates the insight you are waiting for. Alan Watts frequently reminded us that life is not a rehearsal. There is no future moment where everything aligns perfectly and the door opens effortlessly. The door opens when you step toward it. This lock exists because you treat existence as a problem to be solved rather than an experience to be entered. You wait for the right feeling, not realizing that feelings follow motion more often than they initiate it. The pain beneath this lock is quiet regret, not dramatic remorse, but the slow erosion of vitality caused by unused potential. The solution is not recklessness, but trust. Trust in your ability to respond as life unfolds, rather than demanding guarantees in advance. When you stop asking whether you are ready and start asking whether you are present, movement becomes natural again. If Lock 4 spoke to you, write in the comments, "I choose movement over waiting." Let this be a declaration, not a promise of perfection. And if this series revealed something true about you, subscribe to this channel. Not because answers are coming, but because the right questions asked honestly dissolve more locks than force ever could.